explains.
Adding fractions.
Today, our learning intentions are to understand that adding fractions requires a common denominator, to be able to add two fractions considering their lowest common denominator, and to be able to add mixed numbers. We will know we are successful when we can add two fractions by converting to a common denominator if required, and when we are able to add mixed numbers. Today we're going to look at adding fractions, and of course, because it's me, we need to think about it in terms of pizza. As you can see here, I've got 1/5 of a pizza plus 2/5 of a pizza. If I remember back to what my numerator and denominator represent, I can think about this very logically. My denominator was how big the pieces are. So the pieces have not changed sizes, they are all 1/5 big. So my denominator is going to remain the same. However, I now have two lots of numerators that I'm adding together. I've got one piece plus two pieces, which obviously altogether I have three pieces. So altogether I have three pieces that are 1/5 big, so that's 3/5. So when we're adding fractions that have the same denominator, it's really easy. We just add the numerator and keep the denominator the same. However, when we have fractions that have different denominators, we're going to have to do a step first. So here I have an example, 1/2 plus 1/3. If I was to think about this logically, I've got this large piece of pizza and this pretty large piece of pizza. If I was to put them together, I would have almost a full pizza. However, if I just added the numbers together, that's not what it would look like. If I had 1 plus 1 and I wrote 2, and maybe if I thought I had to add the 2 plus the 3, that would be 5, and 2/5 is not what I have. That's not almost a whole pizza. And anyway, we know that the denominators are meant to stay the same, but if I got two different denominators, which one do I pick? Well, what we should know by now is that we can convert fractions so that they have the same denominator, and then I can easily add them. So now I've cut this pizza into more pieces so that my denominator is 6. And on the left-hand side, I have 3/6, and on the right-hand side, I have 2/6. If I think about this mathematically, I multiplied this fraction by 3 and this fraction by 2. And now I can easily add them together because they have the same denominator, my pieces are the same size, and I can say I've got 3 pieces plus 2 pieces, which equals 5/6 pieces, which is almost a full pizza. Let's quickly go over the key ideas before we get into some questions. Fractions can be simplified easily using addition if they are like fractions. That is, they have the same denominator. Or if we think about it like pizza, they cut up into the same size pieces. And we know how to do that. That's just equivalent fractions. If two or more fractions have the same denominator, to add them, you simply add the numerators and keep the denominator the same. Once fractions have the same denominator, we are obviously going to add the numerators together because that's how many pieces we have. But we're not going to make any changes to the denominator when adding because that's the size of the piece, which doesn't change when we add. If we have different denominators, we convert them using the lowest common denominator first. And we know how to do that. We know how to find equivalent fractions. And lastly, and this is always the rule, after adding fractions, always look if it can be simplified or if it needs to be turned into a mixed number. Let's have a go at adding some like fractions. So it says add the following fractions, and we can see that they have the same denominator, meaning they are like fractions. So I'm going to write out my question. Once they have the same denominators, which I have, I'm adding the numerator, 1 plus 3 equals 4, and I'm keeping the denominator the same. That's it. B. They all have the same denominator, so now all I have to do is add the numerators. 3 plus 5 equals 8. 8 plus 6 equals 14. That's 14/11. I see that that is an improper fraction, so I should always convert it. 11 goes into 14 once, with 3 left over. So that's 1 3/11. You have a go at adding some like fractions. Let's quickly go through the answers. I can see that these both have the same denominator of 7, so I'm adding the numerator. 4 plus 1 equals 5 over 7. For B, they all have the same denominator, so I'm adding the numerators. 4 plus 2 equals 6. 6 plus 5 equals 11. That's 11 over 9. This is an improper fraction. So I say, how many times does 9 go into 11? That's once. 2 left over, that's 2 over 9. Now that we know how to do like fractions, let's see what we do when we come across fractions that are not alike. Again, my instructions are to add the following fractions. Here I can see these two fractions have different denominators, a 5 and a 2. So my first step is to figure out the lowest common denominator. If you're not sure how to find the lowest common denominator, you will need to go and watch the other video on equivalent fractions and practice that many times, because this will come up in all the fraction work that we do. Here my lowest common denominator is 10. So that's what my new denominator is going to be. So I say, how do I get from the 5 to the 10? That's times by 2. And whatever I've done to the top, I need to do to the bottom as well. And 1 times 2 is 2. And then how did I get from the 2 to the 10? That's times by 5. And the top and the bottom need to be multiplied by the same. 1 times 5 equals 5. So here I have my two new fractions representing the same information, but they have the same denominators. They're now like terms, so I can add them. All I have to do is add the numerators. 2 plus 5 equals 7. Check, can it be simplified? It can't, so I'm done. B, I have 3/4 plus 5/6, different denominators. I figured out that my lowest common denominator is 12. So that's what my new denominator will be, 12. How did I get from the 4 to the 12? That's times by 3. And 3 times 3 is 9. How do I get from 6 to 12? That's times by 2. And 5 times 2 is 10. Now that my denominators are the same, I can add the numerators. 9 plus 10 is 19 over 12. I can see it's an improper fraction, so I need to convert. 12 goes into 19 one time, with 7 left over. 7 over 12. You have a go at adding some unlike fractions. Let's go through the answers. 1/3 plus 1/5. The lowest common denominator is 15. How do I get from 3 to 15? Times by 5. And 1 times 5 is 5. How do I get from 5 to 15? Times by 3. 1 times 3 is 3. Common denominators now. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 over 15. B is 3/4 plus 7/10. My lowest common denominator is 20. So my new fractions will be over 20. How do I get from 4 to 20? That's times by 5. And 3 times 5 is 15. How did I get from 10 to 20? That's times by 2. And 7 times 2 is 14. Now that I have common denominators, I can just add the numerators. 15 plus 14 is 29. Over 20. Denominators stay the same. That is an improper fraction, so I say, how many times does 20 go into 29? That's 1 time with 9 left over. Keep the denominator the same. The last thing I'm going to show you is adding mixed numbers. Now there are two methods to doing this. One way is to add the whole numbers first and then add the fractions second. The second way is to convert them both to improper fractions. Now, in some situations, it might be easier to add the whole numbers first, but I am going to let you know that when we subtract, multiply, and divide fractions, we have to convert them into improper fractions. So sometimes it can just be better to always convert to improper fractions, because then you always know that is your first step and you don't have to try and remember which one is for which. So I'm going to show you the first example with both, but after that, I'm just going to convert into improper fractions. So let me show you these two methods. I've got 3 2/3 plus 4 2/3. So if I'm going to add the whole numbers by themselves, I can separate them off. I've got 3 plus 2/3 plus 4 plus 2/3. And I'm going to group the like parts together. I've got the 3 and the 4. They're whole numbers. 3 plus 4 equals 7. So I've got 7 plus 2/3 plus 2/3. Because they've got the same denominator, I can add the numerators straight away, which is 4. So I've got 7 plus 4 thirds. Obviously I can convert that because it's currently an improper fraction. 4 and a third is 1 and 1/3. So I've got 7 plus 1 and 1/3. 7 plus 1 equals 8 and 1/3. Method 2 is to convert them both into improper fractions. So I've got 3 and 2/3 plus 4 and 2/3. 3 times 3 equals 9 plus 2 equals 11 over 3. 4 times 3 equals 12 plus 2 equals 14 over 3. They both have the same denominator, so I'm going to add the numerators. 11 plus 14 equals 25 over 3. How many times does 3 go into 25? Well, I can use my math here. 3 into 25. 3 into 25 goes 8, remainder 1. That means I've got 8, remainder 1 over 3. You can see they both come out to the same answer and they have approximately the same amount of working out that you need to show. But as I said, for all the other operations, you have to convert to improper fractions. So that's the method I think is easiest to just learn and memorize. Let's do B. So 2 times 6 is 12, plus 5 is 17 over 6. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 3 is 15 over 4. Now I have different denominators and I figured out my lowest common denominator is 12. So I have to go, how did I get from 6 to 12? And that's multiplied by 2. I now need to go 17 multiplied by 2, which is 34. How did I get from 4 to 12? That's times by 3. 15 times 3 is 45. You are welcome to do any of these little operations on your calculator as long as you're writing down all your information. Now that I have common denominators, I can just add them together. 34 plus 45 equals 79 over 12. 79 divided by 12 is 6, remainder 7. So that's going to mean I have 6 and 7 over 12 as my answer. You try adding some mixed numbers. Let's do these answers. 1 times 5 is 5 plus 3 equals 8. 2 times 5 is 10 plus 3 is 13. They have the same denominators, so we just add the numerators. 8 plus 13 equals 21 over 5. 5 goes into 21 4 times with 1 over 5 left over. B. 2 times 10 is 20 plus 1 equals 21 over 10. 1 times 4 equals 4 plus 3 equals 7 over 4. The lowest common denominator is 20. How do I get from 10 to 20? That's times by 2. 21 times by 2 is 42. How do I get from 4 to 20? That's times by 5. 7 times 5 is 35. Now that they have the same denominator, I can add the numerators. 42 plus 35. That is 77 over 20. How many times does 20 go into 77? Well, that's 3 times, and 3 times 20 is 60, which means I have 17 left over. 3 and 17 over 20. I hope now you can add two fractions together, converting them to a common denominator if you need to, and you can also add mixed numbers together.